What if I told you that Hagar, the woman you were taught to see as just a disposable Egyptian servant, was actually a princess, daughter of Pharaoh? Today, I will show you how the story of the first woman to give a name to God was systematically diminished to hide the protagonism of a black African matriarch. We will delve into ancient traditions that reveal that Hagar was not a passive victim, but a woman of royal lineage who received divine promises as grand as those of Abraham. If you want to find out why this truth was hidden from you for centuries, leave a like and subscribe. Get ready, because Hagar's story is much more powerful and much more African than any sermon has ever told you. What few realize is that the figure of Hagar, often reduced to a simple servant in the biblical narrative, has a much more complex and enigmatic dimension. The official history presents Hagar as Sarah's Egyptian servant, used to produce a son for Abraham due to his wife's sterility. But reality shows that this is a simplified and incomplete version, which does not do justice to Hagar's true identity. In ancient Jewish texts, such as the Midrash Rabbah and the Book of Jubilee, an alternative narrative emerges, where Hagar is revealed as a figure of high birth, the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. When Abraham and Sarah traveled to Egypt, as narrated in Genesis 12, the pharaoh, deceived by the belief that Sarah was Abraham's sister, took her for himself, resulting in divine punishments. Upon discovering the truth about the relationship between Abraham and Sarah, Pharaoh was so impressed by the power of Abraham's God that he decided to offer his daughter Hagar as a gift to Sarah. However, Hagar was not handed over as a common slave. She was granted a lady-in-waiting, a position of prestige and trust, indicating her noble origin and the respect her lineage deserved. It turns out that this new perspective on Hagar completely changes the way we interpret her life and actions. If we consider Hagar as an Egyptian princess, we realize that her narrative is not one of submission, but of choice and agency. Even though she had the option of returning to Egypt and her previous life of royalty, Hagar chose to remain with Abraham and Sarah, a decision that reveals not only her loyalty, but also a possible affinity with the new faith that Abraham represented. History reveals that Hagar not only bore Ishmael, but did so as a woman of two royal lines. Ishmael, therefore, was not just an unwanted son of a servant, but rather a blood-right heir of both the lineage of Abraham, the patriarch of the three great monotheistic religions, and Egyptian royalty. This double genetic and cultural heritage gave Ismail a unique and potentially powerful position, capable of uniting two distinct cultures and traditions. The facts reveal that Hagar's story challenges conventional notions of power and subservience. By being presented as a passive figure, the traditional narrative omits her true influence and importance. As a woman of noble origin, Hagar influenced not only the house of Abraham, but also the course of religious history, being the mother of Ishmael, considered the patriarch of the Arab nations. Documents prove that when revisiting these ancient texts, we are invited to reconsider the biblical narrative and recognize the complexities and depths of its characters. Hagar's trajectory, when seen in this new light, offers a rich and multifaceted view of a figure who played a crucial role in the spiritual and cultural history of the world. What legacy did Hagar really leave behind? The question remains, are we prepared to reevaluate history from a new perspective and recognize the hidden truths it can reveal? Why does Hagar, such a prominent figure, receive so little attention in biblical scriptures compared to other matriarchs such as Sarah, Rebecca, or Rachel? The reality shows that, although Hagar is mentioned briefly, her presence reverberates through a deeply spiritual and powerful revelation. She is not just a secondary character. Hagar is the first woman in the Bible to receive a divine epiphany and give a name to God, calling him El Roi, the God who sees me. This act of naming represents an intimate and direct recognition of divinity, something rarely attributed to any character, let alone a woman described as a servant. This suggests that Hagar possessed a unique understanding of divine nature, an understanding that conventional biblical accounts do not explore in depth. The facts reveal that this spiritual experience of Hagar is not an isolated event. She receives a promise directly from an angel who guarantees that her descendants will be immeasurable, echoing the same blessing promised to Abraham. However, While the promise to Abraham is widely celebrated and publicized, Hagar's is often relegated to oblivion. Why are the revelation and promise made to Hagar marginalized? The answer may lie in the uncomfortable truth that recognizing the spiritual status and blessing conferred on an African woman on par with Abraham challenges traditional, Eurocentric scriptural narratives. If Hagar, a woman of African descent, is seen as bearing a similar divine promise, the story needs to be re-evaluated, as it suggests that God's blessing is not restricted to a single lineage, but is inclusive and all-encompassing. The truth is that Hagar's story challenges conventional notions of spiritual hierarchy within sacred texts. What few realize is that, when examining Hagar's narrative in this new light, we encounter a figure who is not just passive, but active and determining in the spiritual history of humanity. Hagar is not just a servant, she is a matriarch of a blessed lineage, mother of Ishmael, whose descent is also recognized as significant. The promise made to her proposes a vision of divine inclusion and multiplicity that extends beyond the borders of Israel's lineage. Documents prove that the minimization of Hagar's story can be seen as a reflection of social and cultural structures that seek to maintain narratives of power and exclusion. By revisiting Hagar's story with a more critical and inclusive eye, we are challenged to recognize that divine blessing transcends racial and social barriers, offering a broader and deeper understanding of the spiritual plane. And the question remains, what other truths about biblical figures have been hidden by dominant narratives? Why is such a profound encounter between Hagar and God treated so simply in the scriptures? This passage in Genesis 16 may seem like a footnote, but it is in fact one of the most significant moments in the biblical narrative. When Hagar flees into the desert, she not only tries to escape Sarah's mistreatment, but seeks a place where she can exist away from the judgmental eyes. And it is in this scenario of isolation and despair that the angel of the Lord appears. The designation of this being is not casual. Many theologians believe that the angel of the Lord is a manifestation of God himself, a theophany. This is a monumental revelation, as it means that Hagar, a marginalized woman, is worthy of a direct encounter with the divine, something few in the Bible experience. What few realize is that by naming God El Roi, Hagar not only recognizes the divine presence, but also redefines her own identity. She, who was seen only as a servant, is now the one who saw and was seen by God. The depth of this act lies in the fact that, in biblical culture, giving a name to something or someone is an act of powerful significance. Hagar, by naming God, takes an active role in the sacred narrative, establishing a direct and personal relationship with the Creator. This is not just an act of courage, but a declaration that she is seen, recognized, and important to God. Reality shows that the encounter in the desert is not just an isolated event, but the turning point in Hagar's life and in the history of her descendants. The angel of the Lord instructs Hagar to return to Abraham and Sarah, but not before giving her extraordinary promises. He ensures that his son Ishmael will be the progenitor of a great nation. This divine commitment to Hagar places her lineage on equal footing with that of Abraham, challenging the hierarchies established in traditional narratives. The promise of countless descendants echoes the same blessing given to Abraham and Sarah, suggesting that God's covenant is not limited by blood ties or social status. Research shows that this narrative of Hagar is often underestimated due to the social and theological structures that dominated at the time the Bible was compiled. Hagar's importance as a significant spiritual figure challenges these structures, offering an inclusive view of divinity that does not discriminate based on race or social status. Hagar's story reveals a dimension of God that is attentive to the pain of the marginalized and responds with compassion and justice. The facts reveal that this scene in the desert is a powerful illustration of God's presence in the most unexpected places and with the most unlikely people. The divine decision to appear to Hagar and establish a pact with her redefines notions of who is worthy of receiving divine revelation. Hagar's story, seen in this new light, is not just that of an Egyptian servant, but of a woman whose encounter with God transforms the trajectory of her life and that of her descendants. The question that remains is, why has Hagar's narrative been relegated to such a secondary role when her encounter with the divine is so central to understanding a faith that embraces everyone, regardless of their origin or status. The answer may lie in the need to reevaluate and rescue the stories of those who have been silenced, recognizing that true spirituality transcends the barriers imposed by humanity. In this way, Hagar's story becomes not only a testimony to divine action, but an invitation to rethink and rediscover the truths hidden in the sacred text. How is it possible that the figure of Hagar, so central to the Islamic tradition, remains relegated to a secondary role in the other great Abrahamic religions? The answer is rooted in the different narratives that each tradition has chosen to follow. In Judaism, Hagar is seen narrowly, almost as a footnote in the story of Abraham and Sarah, a servant who gave birth to a son outside the line of divine promise. This perspective keeps Hagar in a position of subordination without recognizing her own complexity or agency. In Christianity, Hagar's perception is further devalued through Paul's writings. In his epistle to the Galatians, Paul uses Hagar as an allegory of slavery in opposition to Sarah, who symbolizes freedom. This theological interpretation cemented the idea of Hagar as inferior, rejected and in a way cursed, perpetuating a narrative that disregards her dignity and importance. Evidence indicates that this marginalization was not a mere coincidence, but an intentional construction within Western Christianity, which required a narrative that maintained racial and gender hierarchies. By minimizing Hagar, Western Christianity reinforced the idea that Africans and black women were secondary, serving only as props in salvation history. However, Islam adopted a completely different approach. For Muslims, Hagar, or Hajar, is a revered figure, a sacred matriarch whose story is integral to the Hajj ritual. The pilgrimage to Mecca, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, includes the reenactment of Hagar's desperate search for water for her son Ishmael between the hills of Shafa and Marwa. This act of faith and resilience is celebrated annually by millions of Muslims who honor their determination and connection with God. The truth is that the preservation of Hagar's story in Islam is not only a gesture of devotion, but also a recognition of her spiritual importance. Hagar is seen as a woman of indomitable faith, a figure who defied the odds and whose lineage through Ishmael is considered an essential part of the Islamic narrative. This contrast in Hagar's appreciation between religious traditions speaks volumes about how stories are shaped according to the values and interests of those who tell them. In Islam, Hagar is a powerful matriarch. In Christianity and Judaism, an obliterated figure. Historical records show that this recovery of Hagar's narrative in Islam challenges Eurocentric supremacy and offers a more inclusive vision of sacred history. The resurgence of interest in Hagar in contemporary Christian perspectives suggests a necessary re-evaluation of traditional narratives. This rediscovery invites us to reflect on truths that have been hidden or distorted over the centuries. Hagar's story has the potential to reconfigure dominant narratives and offer a model of resistance and dignity. The question that emerges is, are we ready to re-evaluate the stories we have been told and recognize the true dimension of figures like Hagar? Hagar's memory, when rescued from the oblivion imposed by Eurocentric narratives, challenges conventions and offers a new perspective on spirituality and history. It is an invitation to embrace a richer and more diverse view of religious traditions, recognizing that spirituality transcends cultural and racial boundaries. The story of Hagar in the Bible is often underestimated and misinterpreted, but the truth is that it represents a radical twist on traditional narratives. Hagar was not just a voiceless servant, she was a woman of incredible strength and resilience, chosen by God for a significant role in sacred history. His encounter with the divine in the desert was no mere accident, but a divine affirmation of his importance. God saw her, exactly as she was, a woman who found herself in a desperate situation, but who possessed indomitable faith. This divine choice gives Hagar the role of matriarch, defying the traditional view that relegated her to a position of insignificance. What few realize is that the relationship between Hagar and God is one of the first biblical examples of a direct connection between God and a marginalized woman. When Hagar fled into the wilderness, she encountered the angel of the Lord, who many theologians believe to be a manifestation of God himself. This encounter not only rescued Hagar from a desperate situation, but also elevated her to a position of spiritual importance, giving her a promise similar to that done to Abraham. The promise that her descendants would be great and numerous is a testimony to the value that God saw in her and her son, Ishmael. It turns out that Hagar's narrative demands a re-evaluation of traditional sermons that cast her as a figure of rejection. When Hagar names God as El Roi, she asserts her own dignity and ability to define her spiritual experience. This act of naming is powerful because in the biblical tradition, naming something or someone is a symbol of authority and recognition. By giving God a name, Hagar establishes a personal and direct relationship with the divine, subverting the expectation that a woman in her position could not have such agency. This recognition of God as the God who sees me is a powerful statement that Hagar did not go unnoticed in the divine eyes, even when the society around her disregarded her. The facts reveal that Hagar's story is an invitation to rethink the theological structures that have historically marginalized figures like her. The Epistle to the Galatians, where Paul uses Hagar as an allegory for slavery, is often misinterpreted as a devaluation of Hagar. However, when looking closer, one realizes that the intention was to show freedom in Christ, not necessarily to denigrate Hagar. The narrative demands that theologians and Christians look beyond traditional interpretations and recognize the complexity and depth of Hagar's experience as a woman chosen by God. The reality shows that seeing Hagar as a matriarch on equal footing with Sarah completely changes the perception of how Africans and black women are viewed in salvation history. It's not just about rewriting sermons, it's about reshaping the way we read and interpret the Bible. If Hagar was seen and honored by God, then she represents a new narrative, one that validates the experience of oppressed and marginalized women throughout history. This recognition challenges churches to embrace a more inclusive and comprehensive vision of the divine plan, where all people, regardless of their background, are seen and heard by God. The question that remains is, are we prepared to accept a narrative that places Hagar as a central figure in salvation history, with all the implications this has for our understanding of God and humanity? Hagar's story, when seen in this new light, offers a powerful message of hope and redemption for those the world has rejected. A realidade mostra que a narrativa de Hagar, frequentemente relegada ao papel de simples serva, tem consequências que ressoam profundamente nas comunidades negras ao redor do mundo. For centuries, the representation of biblical figures in the arts and popular culture was dominated by Eurocentric images. Matriarchs like Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel were portrayed in ways that did not reflect the ethnic diversity of the Middle East. Hagar, whose African origins are clear, was silenced in this context, confined to a secondary role. This isn't just a question of representation, it's a question of identity and value. When generations of black women read scripture and see no reflections of themselves in prestigious figures, the subliminal message is that they are secondary in the divine narrative. Evidence indicates that this omission was not accidental. Hagar's story was intentionally downplayed, perhaps out of fear of the power her true identity could inspire. Hagar was not just a servant, but a woman of nobility, possibly the daughter of a pharaoh who, despite her challenging position, was chosen by God to be the mother of a great nation. Biblical history shows that God not only saw Hagar, but also heard her cry and promised her immeasurable offspring. This divine promise places her on equal footing with Abraham, challenging traditional narratives that attempt to relegate the African experience to a subservient role. The truth is that Hagar's marginalization in religious history has direct repercussions on the way black women have been seen and seen themselves over the centuries. When black women internalize the idea that they are secondary, their spirituality suffers, as does their sense of agency and self-worth. However, when Hagar's true story is revealed, a transformation occurs. Black women stop seeing themselves as servants and begin to recognize themselves as matriarchs, like Hagar really was. They begin to claim their place of honor in the divine narrative, understanding that, like Hagar, they are seen and honored by God. The facts reveal that the recovery of Hagar's identity as a prominent figure is not just a historical correction, but an act of empowerment and recognition. This recognition not only rewrites the history of faith, but also reinforces the dignity and importance of Black women in society and spirituality. When the true story, Hagar, is celebrated, she offers a powerful model of resilience and dignity that inspires new generations to rise up and claim their place in the world. The question that arises is, if God saw Hagar in her despair and honored her, what does that tell us about the value of lives that have been historically marginalized? It is an invitation to all of us to reevaluate the narratives we accept and recognize the stories and contributions of those who have been forgotten. When Black women discover that they are, and always have been, worthy in God's eyes, a new era of empowerment and faith begins, challenging the structures that have tried to erase them. How is it possible that the figure of Hagar, a central woman in biblical and Islamic narratives, is emerging today as a symbol of resistance and cultural rescue? The truth is that in recent decades, Black theologians have challenged traditional interpretations and reconstructed Hagar's story from a perspective that honors her agency and importance. In the United States and Africa, these scholars are rewriting biblical commentaries that place Hagar at the center of their narrative, revealing her not as a rejected figure, but as a woman chosen by God for a greater purpose. In re-examining Hagar's expulsion, they assert that it was not a punishment, but rather an act of liberation and divine protection. Ishmael, his son, needed to grow up free from the oppressive dynamics of Abraham's house to fulfill his own destiny, a destiny that God assured would be great. What few realize is that this movement to rescue Hagar's story is not just a theological issue, but also a matter of identity and cultural reconciliation. Theologians are highlighting how Hagar, an African woman, is a connecting figure between two of the world's largest religions, Christianity and Islam. In Christianity, she is seen as the mother of Ishmael, while in Islam, Hagar is revered as a holy matriarch whose faith and resilience are celebrated during the Hajj. These shared narratives are being used to create an interfaith dialogue that challenges historical divisions and promotes unity between Christians and Muslims. By recognizing the importance of Hagar, both traditions can find common ground that transcends past conflicts and promotes peace and mutual understanding. It turns out that the revival of Hagar's story is also becoming a catalyst for movements for social justice and equality. Black women theologians are using Hagar's narrative to inspire Black women around the world to recognize their own dignity and worth. Hagar's story, when seen as one of resistance and empowerment, offers a powerful model for challenging structures of oppression and building a more inclusive and equitable future. This not only revises the way we read Scripture, but also transforms how Black women see themselves within sacred history. In a world where they are often marginalized, Hagar's story becomes a source of strength and hope, a reminder that they are seen and honored by God. The facts reveal that the reconnection around Hagar is creating new opportunities for dialogue and understanding between cultures and religions. Divisions between Christians and Muslims have often been fueled by misunderstanding and prejudice, but the figure of Hagar is helping to dismantle these barriers. By recognizing that they both honor Hagar, even if in different ways, there is a recognition that there is more that unites these traditions than separates them. Hagar's story offers a path to reconciliation and building bridges between communities that have long seen each other as adversaries. History reveals that the movement to recover Hagar's true identity is more than a simple historical correction. It is a call for social and spiritual transformation. By re-evaluating Hagar's narrative, we are challenging the power structures that have historically silenced marginalized voices. This rescue not only honors Hagar as a central figure in salvation history, but also empowers new generations to recognize their own potential and importance. The question that remains is, are we willing to embrace this new vision of Hagar and allow it to guide us toward a future of greater equality and understanding? In recent years, a quiet but powerful transformation has been taking place in churches and spiritual communities around the world. Black pastors, especially women, are re-evaluating and reintroducing the figure of Hagar in a new light. They are rescuing the essence of El Roi, the God who sees, and highlighting Hagar not as a figure of failure, but as an example of resilience and unshakable faith. This shift in narrative is not just theological, but deeply cultural, with resonances that extend beyond the pulpit. The truth is that for a long time, Hagar was seen as a figure of rejection, a servant abandoned in the desert. But now, their experiences are being reinterpreted as acts of faith and courage. Even when she was cast out and left to fend for herself, Hagar never gave up hope that God would see and hear her. This unwavering trust in El Roi demonstrates his deep connection to the divine, a connection that many theologians are beginning to recognize as significant as that of other, more celebrated biblical figures. It is this faith that Black pastors are reclaiming in their preaching, inspiring their congregations to see not only Hagar's suffering, but also her strength and dignity. It turns out that this reinterpretation is not confined to spoken words. Contemporary Christian art has played a crucial role in Hagar's reimagining. Artists are creating visual representations that show her as an Egyptian princess, a strong, matriarchal woman. These works not only challenge traditional representations, but also heal deep wounds caused by centuries of erasure and marginalization. Upon seeing Hagar portrayed with dignity and respect, the collective imagination begins to change, allowing a reconnection with her African roots and a reaffirmation of her spiritual and historical value. The facts reveal that these new representations are helping to correct distorted historical narratives, bringing to light Hagar's true identity as a central and respectable figure. When believers see images of Hagar that reflect her nobility and strength, they not only experience historical correction, but also spiritual strengthening. This visual and theological shift represents an important step in the fight against racism and sexism within religious communities, providing a space for Black women to see themselves reflected in a positive and powerful way. Evidence suggests that this shift in perspective on Hagar is not only inspiring sermons and art, but is also creating a movement of empowerment within Black communities. Black women, in particular, are finding in Hagar a model of resistance and faith, a symbol that their stories and experiences are seen and valued by God. By reclaiming and honoring Hagar's story, these communities are establishing a new paradigm of inclusive spirituality that challenges traditional structures and promotes equality. The question remains, how might this new view of Hagar as princess and matriarch influence the way we understand other marginalized figures in sacred history? This recognition is more than a simple correction, is a celebration of the diversity and richness of religious traditions, offering a message of hope and renewal for all. Hagar, often seen only as a servant in the biblical narrative, has an identity that defies convention and reveals hidden layers of leadership and spirituality. As an Egyptian princess, Hagar represents a link between two cultures, a testament to the complex relationships that existed between Egypt and the people of Abraham. His royal origin not only reinforces his dignity, but also suggests that his presence in Abraham's house was marked by strategic choices, not subjugation. The story reveals that Hagar was not a marginal figure, but a woman of distinction who found herself on a profound spiritual journey. Reality shows that, by accepting faith in the God of Abraham, Hagar was not just submitting to a new life, but rather making a conscious choice driven by personal experiences of revelation and divine protection. When God finds her in the desert, it is a recognition of her importance and strength. The desert, often seen as a place of desolation, becomes the scene of a powerful divine manifestation. Hagar names God El Roi, the God who sees her, a testament to her spiritual perception and direct connection to the divine, something rare and significant in her time. It turns out that Hagar was not just a survivor, but a matriarch who gave birth to nations. His son Ismail is recognized as the ancestor of multiple peoples, including significant Arab nations. This powerful lineage underscores that Hagar was the bearer of a unique divine blessing, a reflection of the promise God made to her and Ishmael. The facts reveal that Hagar's story challenges the traditional hierarchy of biblical narratives. While Sarah is often celebrated, Hagar's importance lies in her ability to be seen and chosen by God independently, affirming that divine blessing is not restricted to a single line of descent. Documents prove that recognizing Hagar as a powerful and blessed figure does not diminish the importance of Sarah or the promises made to Abraham and his descendants. On the contrary, it expands the understanding that the divine plan is inclusive and comprehensive. By highlighting Hagar, we recognize the multiplicity of lineages blessed by God, each contributing in a unique way to the spiritual history of humanity. This perspective not only balances narratives, but enriches the tapestry of faith, showing that everyone is valuable in the eyes of God. Hagar's story, when seen in this new light, offers a powerful message of inclusion and diversity. She invites us to reconsider the divisions built over centuries and to celebrate the richness of spiritual traditions that emerge from multiple origins. The question that remains is, are we willing to embrace this broader vision that Hagar offers us, recognizing that in God's blessings, all lineages have their precious place? What if the true story of Hagar could change the way you understand the entire biblical narrative? This question takes us to the heart of a reflection that challenges entrenched views and invites us to reconsider not only who Hagar was, but what her story represents. The reality is that in revisiting Hagar as a chosen princess, we are forced to reevaluate our perceptions about the Bible, about black women, and about divine character itself. God, who revealed himself to Hagar in the desert, is the same one who sees each individual who feels invisible and rejected. He not only observes, but acts, rescues, and honors those the world ignores. Hagar, Pharaoh's daughter, is more than a marginal figure. She is a symbol of resistance and dignity. His story, marked by a direct encounter with the divine, redefines traditional notions of divine power and favor. By naming God as El Roi, Hagar not only establishes an intimate and personal connection with the Creator, but also stands out as a woman with deep spiritual understanding. This act of naming is one of many examples of how Hagar, far from being a mere supporting character, was a protagonist in her own narrative, recognizing and affirming her identity and dignity before God. The facts reveal that, by seeing Hagar as a princess and matriarch, we break with centuries of limited interpretations that reduced her to a servant. This reinterpretation transforms our perception of black women in the biblical narrative, instigating a recognition of their value and impact. Hagar's story challenges the Eurocentric and patriarchal representations that often dominate biblical interpretations, offering a more inclusive and comprehensive view of spirituality. Hagar, when seen in her true light, inspires a new reading of the Bible, where marginalized voices are not only heard, but celebrated. What few realize is that Hagar's story is a mirror of the experience of many who have been disregarded or oppressed, but who find an ally in God. Hagar's narrative highlights that the divine gaze is not limited to those at the center of power, but extends to all corners of humanity, recognizing and honoring those who are often forgotten. This leads us to a deeper understanding of God's character as the one who sees and acts on behalf of the invisible. Ultimately, the question is whether we are ready to accept that Hagar was never a secondary figure, but a protagonist worthy of honor and respect. Accepting this challenges the way we perceive spiritual and social hierarchies. Hagar's story, when viewed from this new perspective, not only rewrites sermons but also reshapes the narrative of faith, validating the experience of women who, like Hagar, were seen by God. This invites us to recognize that, under the divine gaze, we were never servants. We were always children, we were always seen, and we were always loved. Thus, Hagar's story continues to resonate as a powerful testimony and reminder that, in God's eyes, everyone has a place of honor.